Welcome back to the Metal Exchange. Justin and Chris back again, going back to 1994, over 30 years at this point, to talk about King's X and Dogman, our first King's X discussion on the podcast. This one is another one that's come in by request, but I figured I wanted to not only do some of the requests that were in the queue, but this was an album that was kind of on my radar for other reasons. So I'm glad we had a chance to listen to it, and curious to hear your thoughts. Lots to digest here, but before we talk all things King's X, how are you, my friend?
I'm good. I'm happy that this week is over, and ready to talk some King's X. This was really my first time sitting down and listening to this band in any extended form. So, just happy to be here.
Yeah, I feel like music is coming out fast and furiously now. It's almost at that time where you're just inundated with singles for stuff that's going to come out, shortly after the new year. Not least of which was the new Dream Theater single, which I made a concerted effort not to speak to you about in advance because I wanted to just kind of go straight to recording this one. But Dream Theater has announced their new album, Parasomnia, coming out February 7th, 2025 on Inside Out Music. As a result of the new album, the opening track, In the Arms of Morpheus, is the opening track. If you look at the track listing here, a couple of really long songs that kind of are blended together with a one or two interludes in that kind of shorter opening track. Did you have a chance to listen to the new single? I know the answer is yes. It's called Night Terror. What did you think of this song in all of its 10 minutes of glory? I've got thoughts. I wonder if they are the same as yours, because people seem to be all over the map with this. Some people are saying it's terrible. Others are saying this is the return of Dream Theater and that they couldn't be more excited. Where do you fall?
Probably right in the middle of that.
Me too. Me too.
I thought it was a great, a good to great track. I would not say this is a return to the glory days, nor would I say this is awful. I will also say I only listened to it once, and I kind of wanted to listen to it a couple more times, and I just didn't get around to it. But it was good. There were parts of it that reminded me of, scenes from a memory, Train of Thought era Dream Theater, and then stuff that reminded me of recent Dream Theater stuff. So other than hearing Portnoy back in the backing vocals, though, I don't know that I would have picked out that he was back in the band. I'm not a drumming expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I don't know that the musically it's such a big pivot from what they sounded like with Mangini on the last few albums. What did you think as far as Portnoy's influence on this new track?
There were certain elements of the drum fills which were vintage Portnoy, and I think I was able to tell. But then again, I also knew he was back in the band, so it was cheating, right? It was almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy that I would hear things that reminded me of him. I think I would have known if you hadn't told me, but by the same token, I can't say with any degree of certainty that it was a foregone conclusion. That being said, I thought the track was good, maybe really good. I don't know that it was great. And I say that because I think of songs like Scarred or Under a Glass Moon, like these all-time great prog metal tracks. This is not that. I think of late era Portnoy, and I'm like, this is exactly what they were doing with him at the time. Good stuff, maybe pales in comparison to the rest of the discography, but if any other band had put this song out, you would have been like, the song is ridiculous, right? Because it was just so technically proficient. They are a victim of creating images and words and scenes from a memory and 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence. Just because the material from those albums is so iconic, and what this song lacks is some of the earworm qualities of those other tracks or songs on those albums. That being said, it is great to have Portnoy back in the band. I think that this is going to be an album that we should probably cover in long form when we get when we get closer to February of next year. I just think it will be something that we want to dive into and give multiple listens to, or at least I do for sure. And I think curiosity is just getting the best of me on this one. So I don't want to wait. I just kind of want to dive in once I get my hands on it.
I'm with you. I feel like this is probably going to be the most I listen to a new Dream Theater album in a really long time. Like maybe
since 6 Degrees.
Probably. I was going to say since 6 Degrees, because it was after 6 Degrees where my super fandom kind of fell off. I've always remained a fan, but like I was a super fan up until that point, and I don't know if it was just because I wasn't taking the time necessary to listen to some of the new albums, like, you know, over and over and just really digest them. But that it also kind of coincides with the time that I was like less into metal. So I just never was able to get back on board with being like a Dream Theater super fan. So I look forward to, through the podcast, spending some more time with a lot of those kind of like middle era Dream Theater albums, from like Train of Thought up to like stuff that probably came out like 5 or 6, 7 years ago. Like that whole era, I'm not proficient on, I will say.
The reality is a lot of that material is really good, but I wouldn't say it's great or stellar. And even when I was still seeing them live, and I've seen them on many tours, many tours over the last 20 years, the reality is after Train of Thought, the band kind of lost me a bit. And although I remained a super fan, much like to use your terminology, I just didn't enjoy those albums as much as I did the stuff that came up to 6 Degrees. And so maybe this new album will re-energize me. I think a lot of the material is very, very good, but it's just not, I mean, when you compare something to Learning to Live, you're bound to be disappointed. I just don't know how else to say it. But I'm sure that the album will be good. I'm sure it will be one of the best prog metal albums of 2025. I have no doubt about that. And they are the masters, both technically and proficient, you know, from a technical standpoint and just from a songwriting standpoint. They're the best at what they do. Nobody comes close. The only other name at this point that you'd throw in the same breath, I guess, would be a Haken. And even they, you know, I think back to that show where Mike Portnoy played Prog Power and he was playing all the old Dream Theater stuff, and it took 3 guitar players to play John Petrucci's part. So I'll just leave it there. And I'm a Haken fan. I like the band, but at the end of the day, Dream Theater are the kings, and I look forward to it. And so I'm glad we got to spend a little time talking about the single. Admittedly, I don't plan on listening to it again until I listen to the album. That's kind of what I do. I'll listen to a single once, and then I shelve it until the album. I did it with Cemetery Skyline, which came out this week. And to be honest with you, I'm glad I did, because I only listened to 1 or 2 of those singles once, and I was already smitten. And I think this is a really good album, and I think you're going to really eat this up. If it was the comparison I would make is think back to our Typo Negative episode, but with just a little bit more polish and a little bit more positivity, and you get this gothic rock masterpiece. Maybe not a masterpiece, but it's just a very, very enjoyable listen, and I look forward to going back to that album. That came out this week as well. And another album that came out recently, and I had mentioned the cover song that they have at the back end of this album, but the band is called Reverber. They're an Italian thrash metal band. Their new album came out, The Satan Creation, and they had covered Thor the Powerhead by Manowar. I loved the cover, but I had a chance to listen to the rest of the album this week. And if you are a fan of Creator or bands of that ilk, you are going to adore this new Reverber album. They kind of are one of the bigger thrash titans of Europe at this point in time, and they just have that thick but clean production that I adore on thrash records. And so I'll try to post one of their tracks this week. I was very happy with that album.
Nice. Did you have a chance to hear the new Fellowship single? I believe it came out like yesterday or the day before. Track's called Dawnbreaker, and it's going to be on their next album, The Skies Above Eternity. But I feel like it kind of was kind of popped up out of nowhere. But it's I feel like this is a band that's really going to be a bigger deal as time goes on and more people become aware of them. They played at Mad with Power this year. I believe they were one of the headliner bands. But this album comes out at the end of November on the 22nd on Scarlet Records, and this track's got me pretty excited about it. So I'm looking forward to this. I think this might be one of those albums that come out towards the end of the year and you're trying to like scramble to figure out where on the list it goes. And when I say you, I mean me. So we'll see what happens. But this is another album to be excited about, I think.
I have not heard the single. I'll check it out for sure. I'm familiar with the band. I'm familiar with their last album, and I suspect it's good. They are, in many ways, kind of the new wave of power metal, but they still do it and hold my attention. So that is definitely a plus. And kind of in the same vein, the new Dragony album came out this week. I've not yet heard that, but by all accounts, it's very, very good. So I want to give that a listen as well.
Yeah, I have a pretty long list of stuff already. It's been a week and a half into the month, and I have a pretty growing list of stuff, and I still have a few things from Q3 to finish up. So I will catch up. I always do. I'm usually actually way more behind around this time than so. I feel like I'm in okay shape. I've also feel like I've limited is the number of things I've listened to, just because I don't want to overwhelm myself, and I just haven't had the time I would have liked to sit down and listen to stuff. So it's probably better off that I just keep it a little bit more streamlined. I know if anything must hear for me comes past you, you'll let me know, so I can always rely on that to not have to pay super close attention. So.
Yeah, I will definitely make you aware of anything that is a must listen. I get it. This year has been overwhelming in a number of ways, and I think that I'm on par to listen to about the same number of albums as I did last year. The difference is I'm making a concerted effort to try to listen to everything multiple times that catches my attention, and it is becoming increasingly difficult to do that. But nonetheless, we give it the old college try, and I look forward to discussing everything at the year-end episode. That is one of my favorite episodes on the podcast. So all good things and things that I look forward to doing as we wrap up the year. I will transition now to this album that, again, Dogman, which came out on January 18th of 1994 on Atlantic Records, which the second I saw, there's a lot of surprises about this album, which I just was not prepared for. The first of which is the label, right? Because when I think Atlantic Records, I think Sabotage. And this clearly sounds nothing like Sabotage, but it is interesting that the label was putting out so many hard rock and metal albums, even deep into the mid 90s as they were here. Before I talk a little bit about my first exposure, and I alluded to it a little bit on the end of last week's podcast, and before I kind of talk about what Chris Willenbrock, who had requested this from our Patreon, thought, what are your impressions, I guess, or your initial reaction to this? And had you heard any songs? I know this was your first deep dive into one of their albums, but had you heard any of their music before?
If I did, I wasn't aware I was listening to King's X, I guess. I've always known of them because I know there's a connection with Dream Theater, and I'd always heard of Doug Pinnick as just being a really well-known vocalist and bass player for this band. So I was aware that it was an important band and that Doug Pinnick's an important member of the band, but that's really kind of where it ended for me up until just a few days ago.
Yeah, listen, my first exposure was not a good one. I remember back in mid to late 1999, maybe early 2000s, I was just so head over heels in love with metal that anything I could do to listen to more of it, I was going to do. So I went on eBay and I ordered 2 VHS cassettes full of music videos. Had no idea what was going to be on these cassettes, but I just wanted to hear, and in this case, see more metal. And it was, by and large, one of the best investments I ever made because, again, this is pre-YouTube, pre-Spotify. You couldn't find this stuff, and Lord knows they weren't playing it on the radio. But as a result of this purchase, I got to see Dio's The Last in Line video, which is, if you've never seen that, that is a trip in and of itself. But I got to hear the man sing. On this tape, or on these tapes, were Halloween's I Can, which had just come out as a single. And I remember the little MTV logo from, I guess, wherever they had recorded these VHS cassettes from, and just marking out that, like, here we go, Dream Theater was on MTV. It was just a surreal experience. And then there were other bands like, I remember seeing a Warlock video for All We Are and being like, okay, that's a cheesy song, but it was like really catchy at the time and things like that. And then all of a sudden, this band comes on with a song and they don't waste any time going into the title track from this album because, as we'll soon talk about, the song Dogman just kind of really picks up right away and goes right into it. And it almost has a rap-like quality to the vocal delivery. And in my naivety, I'll just say that for all I knew, I'm like, this sounds like the first nu metal band, which was a big thing around 1999. And so I lasted about 30 seconds and then I fast forwarded. I couldn't take it. I hated the first 30 seconds of this track. I was not ready for something that sounded like this. I never went back to it. I skipped it every time I watched these videos. And to say that I'm kind of still a virgin when it comes to this band, this was an album that was on my list to cover because I felt like I just needed to give it a whole listen since I've only lasted 30 seconds the first time I heard it because I just absolutely hated it. I'm happy to say it was a much better experience this time around. But I did have just the smallest bit of exposure to this band about 25 years ago.
Sometimes your first time only lasts 30 seconds and you have to keep trying until, you figure out what you're doing. So
experience goes a long way, my friend.
It makes a lot of sense.
And I lasted about 50 minutes this time. So that's good. Let me read a little bit about what Chris had to say about this album because I think he sums it up nicely. He goes, Dogman was my introduction to King's X. It may not actually be their best record in the catalog. There may be one or two I reach for a little more regularly, but it seems to be one of that a lot of people hear, and I'm taking a chance that it's a good place to start for you. They're not strictly metal per se, but it's comfortably within the bounds of what the Metal Exchange has covered in the past. I agree with that, by the way. These guys are such genuine and down-to-earth dudes, and what they do, or what they may not be for everybody, it's definitely original. If the vibe clicks with you, there's not much else out there quite like it. No band puts me in a better mood than when I hear King's X. It's always been a go-to for upbeat, fun, heavy rock, with a really matched work ethic, relentless touring over the decades, and an understated talent of each of the guys. It's easy for many of us to wonder how they never reached the heights and fame that they deserved. But as they say, if you like what you hear, then go tell somebody. So please, I hope you enjoy the chunky guitars, funky guitar section, and 3-part harmonies from one of the best trios in rock music. Very, very well said. And I'll say this. As I was listening to this album, I made a concerted effort not to read much about them. I just wanted to kind of take the music in. And a lot of what he said were things that I noticed. And then when I did a little bit of research, I was pleasantly surprised to find out I wasn't crazy because there were parts of this album where I actually heard Pearl Jam and other alt-rock bands. And then I quickly found out that it was produced by Brendan O'Brien, and then it all started to make sense because he did a ton of work with Pearl Jam and Stone Temple Pilots and Soundgarden and the Chili Peppers and a lot of those bands that were producing alt-rock albums in the mid-90s. So while King's X was always described to me as a prog metal band, I hear touches of that, but I also hear so many other flavors and genres and things built into the music that it actually made for a pretty interesting listen this week.
I kept circling back to Stone Temple Pilots personally. Just there's that chunky guitar, like you mentioned, has a very Stone Temple Pilots kind of vibe to it. But I'll tell you what, the vocals by Doug Pinnick reminded me of Jeff Scott Soto more than anything else. That was that's what I heard, like this kind of maybe a little bit more soulful version of Jeff Scott Soto. That's what I was. Excellent. That's what I kept thinking of. But it is really interesting, like that, these connections here, because, Doug Pinnick did vocals on Lines in the Sand on Dream Theater's Falling into Infinity album. He also was on the track Dissident by Pearl Jam. So it's like.
Was he really? I didn't see, I knew Lines in the Sand. I didn't know that he was on Dissident. That's wild.
Yeah. It's
obviously the Brendan O'Brien connection, if I'm going to guess.
That connection of those two bands, for me, it's like, how do you connect Dream Theater and Pearl Jam? Well, that's one way. Besides, the other thing I was shocked to see is that, like, I don't know about you, but in 1994, I wanted to go to Woodstock 94 so badly. That lineup was berserk. You had Green Day and Metallica and Aerosmith and Collective Soul and Candlebox and just did I say Green Day? Probably. Just a laundry list of great bands. And I don't remember, but apparently King's X was on that bill. If they were on it at the time, I probably didn't know who they were and just scanned right past it. It was like, oh, Red Hot Chili Peppers, keep on moving. But that's I feel like that's really impressive to even be invited to Woodstock 94. So I think that's a real feather in the cap. And I believe at the time, this album had been out for a few months. So they probably played some songs from this album at Woodstock 94. That is a really cool fact. Yeah.
And they were kind of a big deal at the time. And they've been, what was interesting to me is this was, their fifth studio album, right, in 1994. But what I didn't realize is they have been around and together since 1980. Jerry Gaskell, the drummer, and Doug Pinnick started the band in 1979, and Ty Tabor came in 1980. And that lineup has been intact ever since. And as Chris said, they do tour relentlessly. And one of the elements that was very present on this disc, and it's an element that I adore in a live setting, makes me want to actually see this band, even if I hear it nothing else by them. And that is the vocal harmonies. When you have bands that have multiple musicians singing together, and that's essentially what this is. Not only do the three guys sing together, but they have they had a couple of former members that used to also do backing tracks when they were in the band. So even if they bring out other people or they just tour as a trio, you're going to get that vocal chorale. And when that's done well, nothing, and I mean nothing, beats that live. Vanden Plas, obviously they sound nothing like King's X, but they do that live with the multiple vocalists singing in unison, and I adore when they do that. So to hear it for King's X would be just as enjoyable to me, even though the style is markedly different.
100%. I agree with everything that you just said.
Awesome. So that being said, the other thing I'll just say, and then I won't say it again, what I found pleasant about this album that came out now over 30 years ago, I thought the mix was very good, and I just found it to be an easy listen. I'm not saying that anything blew me away or knocked my socks off, but it was just an easy, pleasing listen from start to finish. Does that make sense? And would you agree with that?
I would. It makes sense, and I would agree with it. To me, it almost is like this perfect ramp from the 90s alt rock that we listened to the 90s prog rock that we would end up listening to. And had I heard this band somewhere in between, it would have made a lot of sense that they were in between, because there is kind of a one of those rare just connection points that I feel like this band really hits, because this album would have fit right in on MTV in the mid 90s, with a Stone Temple Pilots or Red Hot Chili Peppers. This came on, I don't think I would have been well, this is weird. Whereas if Metallica came on, I'd be well, this is a little bit like off of the, what I'm used to hearing on MTV in 1994. Whereas this, I think, would have fit in, kind of a lot, like how Alice in Chains, I think, really straddles that line between being a grunge rock band and a metal band.
Yeah, I think that's exceptionally well said, and I agree with you. And this band is still touring like relentlessly. They played New York like a month ago, so like I'm gonna make a point of checking them out, even though I would never say this is like my favorite album of all time or anything like that. It was just a pleasant listen, and I love the term you used as a bridge, right? Had I listened to this in 1994 when it came out, I think I would have jumped on the Metallica and Tool bandwagon, not in 1996, but probably in late 1994, 6 or 8 months after the album came out, because I would have craved something just a little bit heavier at that point, where it took me maybe a year or two after the release of this album to start appreciating some of the finer things about heavier music. And then obviously my doors were blown off by Sabotage in 97 and bands of like Stratovarius and stuff like that. So very interesting stuff. And with that, I think we should just get into it. The album kicks off with the title track Dogman. And when I say kicks off, there is no intro, there is no build up. It's just this hard rock funk sound right off the bat. And even though I found that first verse to be absolutely abhorrent, like from the time I heard it, it doesn't faze me as much anymore. I actually love the backing vocals during the bridge. I just, that was one of the elements that always jumped out to me, and it does so in spades here. You can see that on tracks like this and many of the tracks, they're really focused on that low end sound. It's not like Yngwie Malmsteen wanking with, like 1,000 notes a minute. It's a really punchy low end sound. This song actually has a very good chorus, and it is not my favorite by any means, but at the same time, there's some really wild vocals, lead vocals, which I think are some notes that I wasn't expecting Doug Pinnick to hit. And I can't really imagine any other song serving as an intro to this album, because it's just a very memorable song.
To me, it's Jeff Scott Soto in the verses anyway, singing Red Hot Chili Pepper vocal lines set to Stone Temple Pilot guitars. Like, it's just this mash of all this other stuff that I've grown to love over the years. And it makes this just amalgamation of this like wild, bluesy song. Like, it's just, it's a cool song to kind of open things up. And like you said, it's like very abrupt how it starts. Like you just immediately there's vocals. Like the song starts immediately with singing. I don't know that this necessarily set the tone for the album, as far as like, I don't know that there was, I feel like the album had a nice variation of styles. It's not like this type of song repeatedly, because there's 14 tracks on the album, so there's a lot of room to explore different areas. But this, I think, was one of the funkier songs on the album. What's the other band I'm thinking of that we covered that kind of had a Faith No More? I had like a kind of a funkiness to them, and that that album we covered was only, I think, a couple of years prior to this one. So I think when Chris, and if we forgot to mention your last name, Chris Willenbrock, who made the request, when he mentioned what did he say? Oh God, I just completely blanked out. I was going to say something about something he said, and now I don't remember what it is. So you say something, and I'll.
So I mean, like, he was talking about the chunky guitars and the funky rhythm and all that stuff. So I totally get it, and I don't think they sound a ton like Faith No More, but I can certainly hear similarities. And there's a lot of bands that really credit King's X as being an influence for them, and I would not be surprised at all if Faith No More was one of those bands that kind of credits King's X for helping explore their sound.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, the quote I was thinking of is, he said, they're not strictly metal per se, but it's comfortably within the bounds of what the Metal Exchange has covered in the past. And I think that's absolutely apropos. Like, there's stuff that we've covered that's way further out of bounds than this. So,
the Monkees come to mind for sure.
I know, especially considering we reviewed one of their like lesser received albums. Like we did one of their best albums. We also did one of their least enjoyed ones.
Yeah, well said. And what I like is that not every song is like the title track. At least here. And I think that a good example of that is Shoes, the next track. It starts with just the vocal melodies, which is different and cool, and I liked it. And then when the band just kicks in with the one note, and then they go right back to the vocal melodies, it's just interesting little tricks that they're doing in terms of the song construction. When the band kicks in, it's a really focused song with a bit of a slower cadence, a bit more experimental in terms of how the vocals come through. It almost sounds like it's coming through like some sort of a distorted thing, but it's done on purpose, obviously. Then it's got this solid but kind of subdued bridge. But again, more than anything else, it's the vocal melodies on this track that stood out to me. And what's interesting is I think the band actually accompanies the vocals as opposed to the vocals accompanying the band on a track like this, which to me is really interesting and different.
When the song kicks in, I immediately am taken to like 70s prog rock, and the song that really reminded me of was "I've Seen All Good People" by Yes, where it's kind of has that that vocal melody of the couple of guys singing together, like kind of a cappella style. It reminded me quite a bit of that, but then the song kind of goes back into kind of that funky rock sound that King's X, I think, showed off during the first track. But I feel like this one's a little bit more, it's probably equally tempo wise, but this song just feels a little less frenetic and a little bit more laid back. But it definitely has kind of that kind of bluesy kind of soulful kind of vibe to it. And I think this kind of really is an example of what you were saying, that this was a very easy listen, and this song I feel like is like the epitome of that kind of idea, that that's just a very like mellow, chill song you could just kind of listen to, and it almost fades into the background in a lot of ways just because it's very easy to listen to.
Yeah, well said. I can't disagree with that at all. What I also, I guess, found was that the next track called Pretend, this one was one of those tunes where, as I was listening to it, bands were just coming to mind in terms of style and influence. I hear a lot of Collective Soul on this track, one of the bands you mentioned earlier. It's because of the riffs, the catchy verses, and really the silky smooth vocals and production quality that you got on Collective Soul albums around this time. And then the chorus gave me a real Pearl Jam vibe. Not one of their best choruses, but nonetheless, it reminded me of Pearl Jam. And I thought that the verses on Pretend were so good that I actually liked the song a lot. It kind of has that quality that makes me move my head to the beat, which is cool. And it even has a little bass solo before the guitar solo kicks in. And then when it was all said and done, and I kind of took the whole song in together, I said to myself, this could have been on Winger's Pull album. Something about this song just felt right for that album, which had come out, a year and a half prior. And obviously it's fresh in my head off the Prog Power experience. But lots of influences on this track, and I rather enjoyed it a lot. It was probably my favorite of the three to this point.
I'm glad you mentioned that Winger album, because I feel like the vocal style is very similar. That way, it's kind of got a staccato to it, and it's like very very deliberate. But man, let me tell you, the music that's going on behind the vocals, there's a lot that reminds me of "Why Go" by Pearl Jam from their first album. Like right from the get go, when the song starts, the opening guitar riffs are very similar to that song, and when like you said, the chorus too is kind of similar. But it's funny because then like the vocals take it in a completely different direction, both like stylistically and also just the type of sound that Doug's vocals produce are really not like an Eddie Vedder or a Scott Weiland. It's again, like, to me, reminds me more of like a funky Jeff Scott Soto. So but this is like another funky tune, and I think I agree with you. I think I like this the most of the first three as well.
What did you think of the next track, Flies and Blue Skies? Not to be confused with Rain Times Flies and Lies. Flies and Blue Skies.
I think that is still the ringtone when you call me, Flies
Really?
and Flies. Yeah, well, I haven't changed my ringtones in about 10 years. So
At least that album came out probably almost 20 years ago now. Great album, by the way, and something we should cover, even though it has a ridiculous title. But Flies and Blue Skies, your thoughts?
Just very chill. Like, it kind of just reminds me of like something you'd hear, like a band playing in a bar, just like a blues bar. Like, it's just a very kind of slowed down. I don't know. It's just a very bluesy tune. I like this a lot, and I think it's a really nice pivot from the first three songs that were like this real mid-tempo funkiness, and this one's just like a really kind of more of a soulful like funk ballad, I guess, if you will.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I definitely feel the blues on this one, especially with the introduction. I think it has a bit of a slower cadence to it, and I think that helps grab your attention. And it's kind of simple, but so effective because of the use of the backing vocals. And this was a song that grew on me a lot throughout the week. I think the guitar work actually serves as like a good payoff towards the end of the track. And I found it very enjoyable. It was in consideration for Song of the Week, and I must not be completely crazy just because when you look at their most recent set list from this tour, they played 3 songs from the album. They played the title track, they played another track, which we'll get to later, and they played Flies and Blue Skies. So it must be at least somewhat regarded as one of their better tunes from this album because 30 years later, they're still playing it.
Yeah, it's there more than words, probably.
There you go, exactly.
Brings everybody to an emotional climax.
I like it.
Hopefully in more than 30 seconds. Sorry, go ahead.
The next tune is called Black the Sky, and this is also has a bit of a funky vibe to it, very similar to Dogman in that respect. It actually harkens back to the first song, but it's one of the heavier songs on the album, and oddly enough, it had a bit of a Black Sabbath feel to me, almost like a Doom thing going on. That said, as much as I love Sabbath, it's probably my least favorite song to this point, and I'm not sure that it's very close. It was a bit repetitive to me. I didn't love the chorus, and I don't know, this particular song was just a miss for me. And one of the first things I did after I heard it multiple times and it just wasn't growing on me, I went to go check to see if it was one of the singles from the album. And I'm happy to say it was not, because this would not have grabbed me back then. So yeah, just the first miss for me, if you will. Your thoughts on Black the Sky?
It kind of got me thinking of Rage Against the Machine, just like that kind of like heavy but kind of slow guitar riff. Again, it does have kind of a bluesiness, a funkiness to it. But I'm with you. It's not one of my favorites of the tracks we've heard so far. I'm curious to see like where, people that have been listening to this band for years and are bigger fans than we are, like what their favorite tracks from the album are. I'm not even sure I know exactly which song I want to pick as my song of the week. I just know that I enjoyed a handful of songs on the second half of the album quite a bit, so I'm kind of holding out a little bit until we get there. But I do want to kind of point out, I really enjoy the super funky guitar solos. Like, you don't really get to hear a lot of guitar solos like that when listening to especially power metal, because the power metal is so like, you're already planning on getting to the next 5 stops before you get there. Whereas like this is, I think you can appreciate it's a little bit slower. It's a little bit like, kind of like the blues, like, you want to pay attention to all the notes and everything. And, So that's kind of what this reminded me of. Like, it still has a bit of that, like, you know, grunge to it, but also in, you know, has almost, even if you want to go all the way back to like Jimi Hendrix stuff, which obviously we'll talk about Jimi Hendrix towards the end, but there's kind of a little bit of that kind of funkiness to it too. It's like that marriage of funk and rock.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really astute point. I completely agree with you. As far as like the cadence of the album goes, you know, like I said, this was Black the Sky, not one of my favorites, but then they transition into Fool You, which up until the last listen was my song of the week. I really like this track. I love the mix. The verses just kind of speak to me, and I love the vocal lines during the chorus. And the verses, to be fair. And I liked how the song just got brighter as it went on in terms of just the feel. It starts off a little dark, but it gets brighter as the song goes on. A great chorus, very good lyrics. And I feel like they could have definitely gotten a lot of mileage out of this song, either playing it live at the time. And they did insofar it was the second single. And I guess deservedly so. It kind of spoke to me in that way too. I think it combines a lot of the Red Hot Chili Peppers funk with the Hootie and the Blowfish type of vocals that were kind of popular around this time and a little bit later, and just a little bit cleaned up grunge sound. So that, and maybe that's a credit to Brendan O'Brien, but like that Seattle grunge, but just a little bit cleaner, and you put it all together and you get Fool You.
Yeah, I feel like this would have been a much more well-received radio song than Dogman, just as far as compared to the other stuff that was coming out around this time. So that's just kind of my feeling. I got Black Crowes vibes from this song. Which,
the bluesiness,
again,
for sure, I think.
So, I'm sorry?
The bluesiness, I think, was probably what. Yeah,
and I think it was also like appropriate for that, you know, the time too. So yeah, I like that this one again has, you know, was kind of a little bit more of a chiller song. I wouldn't call it like a ballad quite like Flies in Blue Skies would be, but just like, again, another really easy song to listen to. Just and I like a little of those like guitar flourishes that you hear here and there. I really do wonder how much of that is Brendan O'Brien's influence, because it definitely feels like they're trying to kind of latch on to the sound of the time without overtly like blowing off what the sound that brought them to the dance, I guess, so to speak.
Yeah, well said. I agree with all that. I can't really add anything, and I think it's an astute point. And unlike what you just said, I Don't Care is the next song on this album, Don't Care. This one has a really meaty low-end riff that kind of permeates this entire song. The verses I found to be a bit mundane, and at first, you know, I think that it gets better as you move on, because the vocal lines actually go a little bit higher in the register, and it has the backing vocals behind it. It has this like airy quality to the bridge, which is kind of interesting, although it's a short little bridge, and some awesome drum fills during the instrumental section that jumped out. The drumming on this album is low-key very, very good. My knock is it's a bit repetitive, so it's got some qualities I love, some things about it that I don't love, but all in all, I wouldn't say it's a bad listen, and it's certainly not like Black the Sky for me. I enjoy it more than that. It's just not my favorite track on the album.
I'm a little surprised it wasn't one of the 4 singles. I feel like this has kind of radio potential for the time. I like the chorus, the kind of like the echo of the background vocals. Kind of, again, I'm glad that you mentioned Winger's Pull album, because that's kind of what that reminds me a bit of. I feel like I'm comparing every song to a completely different band, but I just hear what I hear.
They check off a lot of boxes.
Yeah, I feel like I probably dug this song a little bit more than you did. But I think it's a pretty good song. I wouldn't call it my song of the week, but I think it just keeps the flow going of all like good to very good songs up until this point.
Okay, well, I can appreciate that. And now we kind of get into the back half of the album. And you had said that the back half was really, I guess, what some of the songs that shined for you. And I'll ask you if Sunshine Rain is one of them. It has a bit of a ballad feel to it with the guitar tone and kind of the sweeping bass effects. And I think the chorus is kind of touching and really hits home in many ways. The verses are the highlight. These soulful verses, almost like a TSO type of thing. It doesn't sound like TSO. I want to be clear about that, but it has these soulful verses. Maybe the best bridge on the entire album, and again the layered vocals, which I love. This song is really much better than it probably has any right to be, but I enjoy it a lot.
I think Doug was channeling his inner BB King with some of the vocal, like really. This is another one of the more, I think, bluesier tunes. I like this one quite a bit, actually. For all the reasons you said, I don't know that I have too much else to add, but I do find that like I really enjoy all the different styles of songs that are on this album, whether it's like a more of a kind of a chunky and heavier riff or something like this where I think kind of has more of a just a very bluesy and chill, almost ballad like you said, kind of vibe to it. But they make it work. Like whatever it is that they do on this album, I think they make it work. And so this is nice. And I feel like the flow of the album works really well. Like they didn't backload it with like one type of song or front load it with another type. Like it's a really nice mix. And I think that the songs really flow track to track from start to finish. I don't know that I would mess with the order at all. I know we talk about that sometimes, but I think they as far as like the layout of the album goes, I feel like they really nailed it.
Yeah, the word I would use is balanced. It's a balanced album. And when I talked earlier about just appreciating the easiness of the listen, I think part of that is due to the order of the tracks. So I agree with you completely. Talk to me about Complain, the next track. This one's a little bit more upbeat. What are your thoughts on this one?
I like this one a lot. As a matter of fact, I'm going to make it my song of the week. I think that it's another song that those Stone Temple Pilot guitar like tones are very apparent here, but I also think that the verses have a bit of a Stone Temple Pilots vibe, especially like early, like the core album I'm thinking of. Just the way that the lines are delivered by Doug Pinnick. But this is one of the songs where I feel like I thought all the parts of the song were great. Like it all came together. I really enjoyed the verses. I really enjoyed the chorus. I really enjoyed the solos. Really enjoyed just about everything about it. I think it comes together and makes for a really just enjoyable, easy to listen to. It's the shortest song on the album if you don't count the really quick, less than a minute for Go to Hell. But just an easy song to listen to. I like this one a lot. Why don't we listen to it? I'm eager to hear what you have to say about it. But as we do, we'll listen to it for about a minute. We'll come back and you can either praise or complain.
Okay, that was Complain from King's X. I am very happy that you chose this song. I think it was in my top 3 for Song of the Week. I had alluded to earlier that there was a track, that I had was basically my song of the week, and then I pivoted at the last minute, and we'll get to that track in a bit. But this track was up there as well. You are so right. It has that alt rock vibe in spades on this thing. I don't hear Stone Temple Pilot as much, although now that I listen to it again, I can hear it. To me, it screams Alice in Chains, and that's not a bad thing. I enjoy that thoroughly. I think that the catchy earworm of a chorus is really just helping this thing stand apart from some of the other songs. And I love the guitar solo too. I think but the guitar work and that warm, catchy chorus hooked me. And you could have done a lot worse than choosing this. So excellent choice. And then we kind of finished this thing off in a weird sort of way. And I say that because the next track is called Human Behavior. And after this, the album really gets diverse and interesting. But Human Behavior is a tad slower, proggier, and I can't help but feel that the drums just held this entire track together. It's not a favorite of mine, but the chorus is rather memorable. And I'm just waiting the entire time for like this kind of big payoff. And it kind of comes when all the instruments come together towards the end of the track, but still it left something to be desired. So I like the tune. I just don't love it.
That's fair. This is another one of the songs I really enjoyed. I thought considered making it song of the week. I think at the end of the day, I enjoyed Complain just a touch more. I really like, he really goes for it with that chorus. I think I feel like he really extends his voice in a way you don't hear a ton on the album. And just, it makes for a really, I think, like good but heavy mid-tempo tune. It's bluesy and soulful, but also heavy at the same time. And I think it kind of marries those two sounds that we've heard separate here and there, kind of all come together on this track. I think it really works. So I was a fan of this one.
Good. I mean, I'm glad you liked it. Like I said, I wouldn't expect us to be on lockstep on an album like this, but generally speaking, I think we are. Where this album really took an interesting turn for me was the next track, Cigarettes. This is a really intriguing ballad. The vocals are almost a bit muted, almost understated in a way, which I thought was a cool effect. And it has just a different feel than the rest of the album. And I'm not sure if it's the way that main riff or it's the contrast between the verses and chorus, which are very, very different from one another. But I loved this tune. And by the end of the week, I had no choice but to make it my song of the week. So I want to listen to Cigarettes again. I want to kind of just wrap up with some of my final thoughts on that track, and then I want to hear your thoughts. But let's give King's X's Cigarettes a listen. So what I really found interesting is not only the contrast between the verses and the chorus on Cigarettes, but these little simple guitar fills that kind of blended the sections together. I just love those couple of notes that they did multiple times on this song. And I thought the instrumental sections were very good too. And a really just bluesy Jimmy Page style guitar solo. I was surprised to find out that this was not one of the singles, because even though it's a bit of an outlier in terms of the sound, I feel like it could have been released and gotten some radio play. I'm not sure that there's any other song that I would want to hear live. I feel like it would just be a really cool live track. But again, they're not playing it on the most recent tour anyway. But I'd be shocked if they didn't play it in the past. What did you think of this song?
I heard this was supposed to be the first single, but then Philip Morris put an injunction on it, and they had to go with Dogman instead. So unfortunately, there was a big woof on that one. But listen, I echo all of your sentiments on this song. I think again that's why I really feel like the end of the album, especially starting with "Complain," like really. I feel like the album really picked up for me, and this is another one of those tracks. I think, along with like "Flies in Blue Skies," it's just this like really chill, soulful type of song that I 100% agree with you. Would be really cool to hear live. I'm hearing "Pain of Salvation."
Really?
So, yeah, just like that.
Interesting.
Especially towards the beginning of the song, but it just kind of has that. Kind of that like bluesy vibe that sometimes you hear. Daniel Gildenlow bust out. So that's, I don't know how many other bands I'm going to mention as we wrap this thing up, but that's what I got on this one. So,
well, I got one more for you because the next track is 51 seconds. It's called "Go to Hell." And it's like, you know what? Let's just throw a punk track on here. And my immediate thought was, where the hell did I put a Ramones record on? I didn't know what was happening, but it was so out of place, but kind of cool and short and just almost provides like an interlude on this thing. It's completely and wholly unexpected after Cigarettes, but alas, the Ramones.
Well, usually after Cigarettes, you are feeling a little jumpy, so this track stands to reason. Oddly enough, Brendan O'Brien would go on to produce records for The Offspring, and that's kind of what this track reminded me of. It's just like really quick in and out punk rock. I think was the right comparison there. It made for a very interesting bridge between Cigarettes and Pillow, which I think Pillow kind of goes back to the purveying sound. I'm not saying all the tracks this way, but the one that you hear the most is kind of this mid-tempo, again, kind of like a Stone Temple Pilots kind of vibe, but like a mid-tempo but heavy and like just chunky guitar, bluesy kind of track. I feel like this kind of it does it just as good as any of the other tracks that are in this style previously discussed. But I like this one too.
Pillow is the third single released from the album, and it's a good closer, and I say closer because it's the last studio track on the album. The verses are fine. The chorus is pretty good. It's just a bit repetitive. It's not a bad song. It's a solid tune, but I don't have much to say about it because I just found it to be a little bit vanilla, but not bad at all. And they kind of end this thing in many ways, I guess, with what sounds to me like a live version of Hendrix's Manic Depression, which is a great Hendrix track, and fits in nicely. It's just a little bit, it almost came off to me like a bonus track, but from what I understand, it's been on the album since its inception, unless somebody can correct me on that.
I can't say for sure, but I can tell you that they performed this song at Woodstock '94, which I'm sure the fans appreciated, being that Jimi Hendrix was at the first Woodstock in '69. So I think that was King's X's way of giving Jimmy a little tribute. I'm sure if I scoured the set lists from that weekend, that they weren't the only band to do so, but they only played like 6 tracks, so it was cool that one of them was this one, and it was cool that they included this on the album. Like you said, I'm not 100% sure if this is something that was only on like certain editions or whatever, but it's on the Wikipedia track listing. It was on the copy of the album I had, so I'm going to count it as part of the album experience. And honestly, like outside of like some of the real standards of Jimi Hendrix, like I don't know that many songs from him, and I wasn't super familiar with this song either. So this was kind of like my first experience hearing it like repeatedly in a short period of time, and it's you definitely get that Jimi Hendrix vibe from it. And I think they really capture that sound in a more modern way, at least, probably 25 years post its release. So cool way to end things off in kind of a different way, like you said, a live track to kind of wrap things up.
Yeah, but very, very, very solid tribute to the king of guitars, and well fitting that they did play it at Woodstock. So with King's X's Dogman in the books, score of 1 to 10, what are you giving this thing?
I am going to give this a 7 out of 10. I just thought it was really solid all the way through. Like most of the songs that were above average for me, I don't know that there were any songs that I disliked. I thought that it flowed well. It didn't overstay its welcome at about 50 minutes. All the songs I don't think overstayed their welcome. Like I said earlier, I praised the order of the songs and the balance, like you said, the flow. Just a very enjoyable, easy to listen to album, and I thank our friend Chris for requesting it.
Yeah, great suggestion. My score is right there with you. It's a 7 for me as well. It's not a perfect album, but I thoroughly enjoyed listening to it each and every time, and it actually made me want to check out more of the band's work. Certainly they've got enough albums that wouldn't be a problem, but again, more than anything, even more than wanting to check out different material from them, I just want to hear what this would sound like live with those vocal melodies and those backing vocals. That's what has me intrigued, to say nothing of the fact that the band's probably played thousands of shows at this point over the last 42 years, which is just absolutely incredible. So next time they're in town, I'm going to try to go out of my way to see it. I think it would be an interesting blend of stuff, even if I'm not familiar with the entire set list. So kudos to them, and kudos to Chris Willenbrook for picking this album, and kudos to myself for getting past the first 30 seconds. So hooray for experience.
There you go. What do you think of Doug Pinnick as a vocalist, just in general? I feel like we compared him a lot to, or at least I did, to Jeff Scott Soto. But
yeah, I think that's a fair comparison.
What do you think his legacy as a vocalist is?
I don't think he's... Well, it's different, right? Because this is not prog metal in the Dream Theater vein, right? This is a little bit different, and he's got a very clean sound to his vocals, which I like. I don't know that he hits the notes that some of these other, musicians do, but you don't need to, because it fits the music so well. You've got a very clean but funky sound, and he's good. I thought it was a very pleasant sound. I wouldn't say he's the greatest vocalist I've ever heard, but it fits the music, and I enjoyed it quite a bit for that style.
I'm with you 100%. I'm glad that I got to hear him outside of doing backing vocals on one of Dream Theater's least regarded albums. So it was cool. And like I said, I mentioned to you earlier, like, I don't know that this is an album I ever would have just picked up and listened to without somebody suggesting it first. So as always, one of my favorite parts of doing this podcast is the opportunity to hear stuff that I would not have heard in any other way. So I thank you for choosing it. I thank Chris for requesting it, and it's just another check mark in the giant book of the knowledge gaps that exist, of which there are many. So I appreciated that quite a bit. So cool choice, and I enjoyed that.
Excellent. Let's transition, shall we, to a couple of worthy news items. Announced earlier today, Helloween is coming out with a Live at Budokan Blu-ray, DVD, CD, LP, blah, 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 you name it. Live at Budokan coming out December 13th of this year. It is a memorialization of their September 16th, 2023 show at Tokyo's Nippon Budokan Arena, which, if I'm not mistaken, I think Dream Theater actually did a live album from there as well, a very famous venue in the pantheon of not only Japanese culture, but world culture. Needless to say...
James LaBrie's vocals go from 1.5 stars to 3.5 stars when they play it live at the Budokan.
And what is Michael Kisk's 5-star vocals? It must be 7 stars because
7
it's
stars.
in Tokyo.
It's the Meltzer
Easily.
special.
I'm obviously looking forward to this. Any chance the Halloween fanboy in me gets to see this band live? We've got the Dogman on the podcast. All is well in the world. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this release a lot. I have no doubt you'll grab it as well.
Yeah, I believe this was the same set list that we saw in New York City, so which was awesome. So it'd be nice to kind of immortalize that. I actually was trying to figure out how to order the Blu-ray earlier, but I'll probably just wait until there's an actual domestic version rather than pay to have it imported. Because usually I think Halloween stuff ends up being released in the States eventually. But it wasn't on Amazon yet, so I will hang in there. But yeah, I would never skip out on a Halloween live Blu-ray, DVD, whatever you want to call it. So yeah. I was even going to mention that, but you beat me to it. So perfect.
Nice. It was on my radar, to say the least. So that we'll move to some touring news. Category 7, the band featuring a whole slew of guys, including John Bush from Armored Saint and one of the Kerry King guitar players, Phil Demmel, and others. They're doing their first U.S. live tour next March, starting at the Baltimore Soundstage in Baltimore, Maryland on March the 6th, and basically just doing a run of shows, I think 14 in total, ending at the Masquerade in Atlanta. This album came out earlier this year. It was not as good as I guess I had hoped, but I just enjoyed John Bush so much that I wanted to mention the opportunity to see him live next March. And another tour, which is interesting, Ensiferum and Corpaclani doing a co-headlining North American tour, going out, playing February 27th in Boston and doing a run of shows ending at the Brooklyn Monarch in Brooklyn, New York on March the 30th. Corpaclani has been announced for 70,000 tons of metal. I wonder if Ensiferum is not far behind as a result. That would be interesting. It's a band that I've never seen but would be curious to see live, and they're doing a number of shows. So I'd be remiss not to mention that one. Are you anywhere near Greensboro? Because I know they're coming to your neck of the woods in North Carolina.
I believe Greensboro is a little bit over an hour from
That's
here.
Not too bad.
Because I believe I looked to see how long it would take me to get to I think there was a wrestling match in Greensboro. I can't remember.
That sounds about right.
I can't remember if it was WWE or AEW or what, but it wasn't super far away. It just wasn't something I really was super interested in doing on a weeknight, which I think it was. Yeah, it's about like an hour and 10 minutes from here to the northwest. So yeah, I don't know if I will go out of my way for that, but if somebody wants to go, let me know, and I'll, if I'm not going alone, I might want to go with somebody else, because I've never seen Corpaclani live, and Ensiferum is very good live. I saw them in Rochester years ago, open for Fintroll, and I thought that they actually were better than Fintroll, and should have headlined.
No, there you go. Looking forward to that. And I'm looking forward to your pick for next week. What are we listening to? Because I can say that in 2 weeks we've got something a little bit different and special, but I have no idea what we're listening to next week. So hit me.
Well, there's a birthday coming up, and that birthday is on October 26th, and that birthday is of Dream Theater's Scenes from a Memory album, which I knew you knew would happen eventually. But the timing of it is all too perfect. 25 years since its release, which is horrifying in so many ways. That it's been that long since we went to Sam Ash on the release date and waited in line to get the band to sign our brand new album. We were listening to the album, waiting online before we even bought it, hearing it for the first time. But I know we've kind of been beating the hell out of 1999 albums lately with anniversaries, but I mean, this was one I just could not pass up. I've had this on the calendar for months now, and the time has come. It'll be by the time the episode drops, it will be the 21st into the 22nd, so a few days before the actual anniversary, which they'll be releasing a novel adaptation of the album on that day, which should be interesting. But it was only a matter of time before we covered this. I'm gonna just not count that we dropped a Change of Seasons episode about 6 weeks ago, because that was kind of a special circumstance. But I just thought it was time, especially with the new single coming out, and there's just it just felt right. So that's my choice, and I think we're gonna have a lot to talk about with this one, and I'm very interested to see where it lands, particularly against the scores that we gave Images and Words and Awake. We both gave Images and Words a 10, so that one's kind of hard to compete with. And Awake, I gave a 9.625, and you gave a 9.75. So it's in those two albums are in pretty rarefied air. But I know that this album for definitely for you is in that area code. So I'm very curious to see. Like my argument was always that Images and Words was superior to Scenes from a Memory, and basically the only way that ends up being false is if I give the album a 10.5 next week. But is it also a 10? Is it just a tie? I don't know. For me, I'm not sure. I haven't gone back and listened to this album start to finish in. I couldn't even tell you how long it's been. Like, it's been a really, really long time. So this is going to be really fun to revisit.
It will come back to you as if you listened to it yesterday. I don't even need to listen to this album. I know it so well. I think I know it is, if not better than, I know it is probably as well as about 3 or 4 other albums in my collection, where it's just I know every single note, every word. I can probably just do it from memory, no pun intended. But yeah, it's a fitting choice. How we don't cover this 25 years to the day, anything else would be just uncivilized. And so that is frightening. We've been doing this for too long. But no, kidding aside, this is a perfect choice. I look forward to it. And then we'll come back with something special the following week. So
I also want to point out that up to this point, I have chosen 4 full-length Dream Theater albums, and you have chosen 1 EP as a bonus episode on the Patreon. So
because you were sick and I had to choose something. So yeah, there you go. I'm
shocked if someone had told me that after 230 so episodes that I was picking most of the Dream Theater stuff. I would have been a little surprised, but
well, as I said, I still think we should do the next album or the new album early in the next year, just because it's just as timely as this in for different reasons. But all that and more to be covered in the weeks and months to come. Enjoy the week, my friend. This has been a fun one. Thanks again to Chris Willenbrock for the request, and we will catch up with you next week when we talk all things Scenes from a Memory.
And a little chat about the NLCS, probably.
Take care, my friend.
Adios.